The wind howled across the ruined city. Buildings stood like broken teeth against the gray sky. Dust and smoke mixed together, covering everything in a dead silence. Only the sound of footsteps echoed as human soldiers marched down the cracked street. Their weapons were ready, their eyes sharp, because in war, peace was never trusted. Among the ruins, one figure stumbled forward. It was an alien mother, her skin pale and dry, her clothes torn from days of running. In her arms, she carried a small child, weak and shivering. The girl's eyes were too big for her thin face, her body too light for her age. She looked more like a shadow than a child. The soldiers stopped at once, weapons raised. The commander held up his hand, signaling them to wait. The alien mother dropped to her knees, dust rising around her. Her voice cracked as she spoke in broken human words. "Please, feed my daughter," she begged. The words were heavy, cutting the silence like a blade. The soldiers glanced at each other, unsure. They had fought these aliens for years, seen friends die in ambushes. Mercy had often been punished with betrayal, but now, kneeling before them, was no enemy soldier, no weapon in sight, only a mother and her child. The commander's heart tightened, but his mind stayed sharp. The child coughed, a weak sound that carried too much pain. Her small fingers gripped her mother's arm with fading strength. The soldiers could not look away. One muttered under his breath, "It could be a trick." Another whispered, "But she's just a child." Every whisper was a battle, every doubt a weapon. The mother bowed her head lower, pressing it to the ground. Tears fell onto the broken stones, leaving dark marks. Her voice shook again. "She has not eaten." 3 days. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of despair. The commander felt the silence grow heavy around him. His soldiers waited for his decision, their trust in his judgment stronger than their own doubts. For a moment, the commander remembered Earth. He remembered old pictures of starving children during human wars. History had shown him that hunger was the greatest enemy. He thought of his own daughter, safe on Earth, her laughter still fresh in his memory. He looked again at the alien girl, her lips cracked, her eyes empty. And for a second, he no longer saw an alien, only a child. But war had carved scars into him. Trusting the enemy could mean death for his men. If this mother was lying, if this was a trap, then mercy would cost lives. The commander's hand hovered near his weapon, his body tense with caution. Yet inside a storm raged, mercy fighting against survival. The choice was more than food. It was about what it meant to be human. The mother raised her head, her eyes glowing with tears. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out again. "Please, she's only a child." Her daughter's head rested weakly on her shoulder, her breath thin and fading. Even the silence seemed to beg now, heavy and sharp in the ruined street. The soldiers' hearts were not made of stone. They shifted uneasily, their weapons lowering just a little. One of them clenched his fists, whispering, "Commander, if we turn away, she will die here." The commander did not answer at once, his face carved with struggle. Duty and compassion pulled him in opposite directions. The moment stretched long, heavy, and painful. The mother, desperate, pushed the child forward. Her hands shook as she laid the girl on the ground before the humans. The child's eyes opened just barely. She looked at the soldiers, not with fear, but with quiet emptiness. There was no anger, no hate, only the silent plea of hunger. That look pierced deeper than any weapon. The commander's breath caught. He saw not an alien, not an enemy, but life hanging on the edge. The world seemed to wait for his choice. Would humanity turn its back, or would it step forward with mercy? The soldiers leaned in, hearts racing, waiting for the order. The alien mother held her breath, her hands pressed together in prayer. The commander's lips parted, but the words did not yet come. The decision would define not only that child's fate, but the image of humanity itself. Mercy or suspicion, compassion or caution. Every eye, human and alien, rested on him. The ruins seemed to hold their breath, and the plea hung in the air, sharper than any blade. "Feed my daughter," she begged, and humanity stood at the edge of its choice. Long before the plea in the ruined city, the galaxy had burned. Humanity was new to the stars, untested, fragile. In the eyes of older races, the alien empire looked down on Earth and saw nothing but weakness. They believed humans were soft, divided, and easy to break. So they came with fire and steel, believing conquest would be simple. But the aliens had made a mistake. They did not understand the shadow that followed humanity. They did not see the history carved into Earth's bones: wars, hunger, survival. Through centuries of suffering, these had shaped humanity. When the aliens struck, they awakened not prey but predators. The first battles were disasters for Earth. Cities turned to ash, fleets shattered in the void. The aliens laughed, calling humans nothing more than insects. But insects, when cornered, bite with fury, and humans were not insects. They were wolves with fire in their hearts. On Earth, every nation united. Old enemies shook hands, rival flags lowered. For the first time in history, humanity stood as one. Factories roared, ships rose from the ground, and weapons of iron will filled the sky. The war had begun, and the aliens soon learned fear. In the void of space, human ships fought like storms. They did not fight with elegance, they fought with desperation. Every victory was paid in blood, every defeat burned into memory. But humans never stopped, never surrendered, never broke. The aliens learned that humanity's strength was not in numbers or size. It was in the refusal to kneel. On frozen moons, soldiers dug trenches in the ice. On burning planets, they marched through fire and smoke. Every battle was brutal, every day a struggle to survive. The aliens saw humans fight even when outnumbered, even when victory was impossible. And slowly their laughter faded, replaced by unease. The shadow of war grew longer. Entire worlds became graveyards, skies filled with wreckage of burning ships drifting like ghosts. The galaxy watched in silence as humans pushed back, step by step. The weak species from Earth was no longer weak. They were dangerous, and the shadow of their vengeance spread across the stars, but the cost was heavy. Whole cities on Earth were gone. Children grew up never knowing peace. Every family had names carved into stone. Fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters lost to the war. The human heart carried both fire and sorrow, and in that sorrow, a new strength was born. The aliens began to fear mercy. They whispered that if humans won, they would burn every world in return. They expected only revenge, because in their empire, mercy was weakness. They could not understand that for humans, mercy was choice, a weapon sharper than steel because it came from strength. The war dragged on for years. Alliances broke, stars dimmed, fleets vanished into silence, but humans endured. Every loss became fuel. Every wound became a scar that hardened them. Even when planets fell, Earth's people rose again. The shadow of war did not crush them. It made them unbreakable. And then came the turning point, a battle above the alien homeworld itself. The sky burned with thousands of ships. The aliens, once so proud, now trembled as human fleets cut through their defenses. It was not elegance, it was not beauty. It was fury given shape. The empire bent, its pride shattered, and the galaxy held its breath. When the war finally slowed, there was no true victory, only silence. Worlds lay in ruins, fields turned to ash, seas poisoned with smoke. Both sides were scarred, both sides broken. But humanity had proven something no empire could erase. They were not prey, they were not insects, they were survivors, who carried fire in their veins. And yet, in the silence after the battles, another shadow rose, the shadow of memory. Humans remembered every life lost, every cry unanswered, every child who starved. They remembered the hunger, the fear, the endless nights of waiting for news that never came, and because of that memory, mercy became both harder and stronger. It was no longer weakness. It was the very proof of their humanity. That was the shadow carried into the ruins of the city. when the alien mother begged for her child's life. The soldiers did not see only her. They saw the echo of the war, the laughter of the aliens when humanity first suffered, and the fire that had burned until humanity stood unbroken. The war was not forgotten, and the shadow of it lingered in every choice. Mercy was possible, but it would never be simple, because in the shadow of war, every act of kindness felt like a gamble with death. The street was silent except for the sound of the child's shallow breath. The alien mother stayed on her knees, head bowed, arms trembling as she held her daughter close. The human soldiers surrounded her in a half-circle, weapons still raised, their eyes sharp with fear and doubt. It was no battlefield now, but it felt more dangerous than any fight. One decision could mean life, or it could mean death. The commander stood at the center, his shadow long in the fading light. He stared at the mother, then at the small figure in her arms. The child's lips were dry, her eyes half closed, her body weak as if one more hour would end her life. The plea of the mother echoed again in his mind. "Please, feed my daughter." The words had been simple, but they tore into him like blades. Around him, his soldiers whispered. One said, "It could be a trap, sir. They use tricks." Another said, "But look at her. She can barely breathe, that is. No soldier's trick." The whispers grew louder, mixing fear with compassion. Each voice pulled the commander in a different direction. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of command pressing down on his chest. Every order he gave meant lives saved or lives lost. But this order was heavier than any he had given before. This was not just about strategy. This was about the soul of humanity. Would they choose suspicion or would they choose mercy? The commander's eyes moved to the soldiers on his left. Their faces were hard, scarred by war, eyes cold with memories of ambush and betrayal. They remembered when alien soldiers pretended to surrender only to strike. They remembered friends torn apart because they trusted too soon. Their silence spoke of fear, anger, and the need to protect. Then he looked to the soldiers on his right. Their eyes were softer, their grips on their weapons less tight. They had families back on Earth, children waiting, wives praying. They saw not an enemy, but a child who could be their own. Their silence spoke of hope, compassion, and the wish to heal. The commander's thoughts raced. If he chose to help, and it was a trick, his men could die. If he chose not to help, and the child died, humanity would be no different than the Empire. They once fought. The war had ended, but its shadow was still here, standing between mercy and survival. He could feel the eyes of history watching him. Every choice would be remembered, every choice carried weight beyond the moment. The alien mother lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were red from tears, but they were steady now. She looked at the commander, not as a beggar, not as an enemy, but as a judge of her child's life. Her lips trembled as she whispered again, "She is innocent, please." The sound was weak, but it carried more force than any weapon. The child stirred, opening her eyes just enough to see the soldiers. There was no anger, no hate, only emptiness and hunger. Her gaze lingered on the commander, her tiny hands twitching as if reaching for him. The sight struck him harder than any bullet could. It was not the eyes of an alien, but the eyes of a child who wanted to live. One soldier broke the silence, his voice rough. "Sir, if we let her die here, what do we become?" Another answered. "If we give them food and they betray us, what will we lose?" The arguments clashed like swords, filling the ruined street with invisible battle. The commander stood in the middle, his jaw tight, his breath slow. He could not answer too quickly, for both paths carried danger. He thought of his own daughter again, safe at home, her laughter filling the air. He imagined her starving, begging strangers for food, and strangers turning away. The thought burned into him like fire. But he also thought of his soldiers, men who trusted him with their lives. If mercy led them into a trap, their blood would be on his hands. The weight crushed him, pulling him in two directions at once. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretched longer, the air thick with tension. The mother pressed her forehead to the ground again. The child coughed, the sound thin and sharp in the silence. Every second stretched into eternity. Every heartbeat was louder than the last. The world seemed frozen, waiting for his decision. The commander finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "We stand at a choice," he said. "If we give mercy, we may risk death. If we give nothing, we may lose ourselves." His words hung in the air, heavy as stone. The soldiers looked to him, waiting, their hearts caught between fear and hope. The alien mother clutched her child closer, her body shaking. The child's breath rattled softly, each sound a reminder of how close death was. The commander's eyes narrowed, his mind racing, and still, the choice lay before him like a blade with two edges. Whichever path he took, blood or memory would follow. The silence was broken only by the whisper of the mother. "Please," she said, her voice a thread of hope in the dark. The plea cut through the whispers, through the doubts, through the fear, and once again, humanity stood on the edge of its own reflection. Would they turn away and let the child fade, or would they risk everything and choose mercy? The world seemed to stop around the commander. Every soldier's eyes were on him. Every breath from the alien mother was a prayer, and every weak sound from the child was a reminder that time was slipping away. The air felt heavy, as if even the ruins themselves waited for his command. The commander's heart pounded, his jaw clenched, his mind torn. He remembered all the warnings, all the lessons of war. Never trust the enemy, never show weakness, never let pity cloud judgment. But he also remembered the stories of Earth, stories of hunger, of children who survived because someone, somewhere, had shown mercy. The mother pushed her child forward again. Her hands shook as she placed the girl at the commander's feet. The girl lay there, too weak to cry, too weak to beg. Her thin arms rested by her side. Her lips cracked, her breath shallow. Her eyes opened just enough to meet the commander's gaze. And in those eyes, he saw not an alien, but innocence. The soldiers whispered again. "Sir, it could be a trap," one muttered, his hands gripping his weapon tight. "Sir, she will die if we do nothing," another said, his voice trembling with compassion. The two voices clashed, suspicion against mercy, fear against hope. The commander felt both arguments. Cut into him one wrong order and he could doom his men, but one cold order and he could doom his own humanity. He closed his eyes for a moment. In his mind he saw his own daughter, smiling on Earth, safe and warm. He saw her face in the alien child's face. Different skin, different eyes, but the same fragility of life, the same desperate need for protection, the same silent plea. When he opened his eyes, the commander's face was hard, but there was something new in his gaze. A decision had formed, heavy but unshakable. He raised his hand, and the soldiers stiffened, waiting for the command. His voice was steady, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 battles. "Give her food," he ordered. The words echoed through the street. Some soldiers gasped, some lowered their heads in relief. Others clenched their fists, uncertain but obedient. The order was clear, the choice made. One soldier stepped forward, slowly reaching into his pack. He pulled out a ration, hard bread, and a water flask. His hands trembled as he knelt. He placed the food before the child, his movements careful, cautious. The alien mother's breath caught, her body shaking with disbelief. Her lips parted, but no words came, only tears. The child blinked, staring at the food. At first she did not move, as if afraid it was a dream. Then, with weak hands, she reached out. Her fingers touched the bread, pulling it close. She ate slowly, every bite small, her body too weak to hurry. The water touched her lips, and for the first time in days, hope filled her eyes. The mother sobbed, covering her face with her hands. She pressed her forehead to the ground again, whispering words in her own language. The soldiers did not understand, but they did not need to. Gratitude has no language, and they could feel it in her trembling voice. The commander stood tall, his eyes fixed on the child. Mercy had been given, but danger still lingered. The soldiers remained tense, weapons half raised. They scanned the ruins, waiting for the ambush that might come. Every shadow looked suspicious, every sound too loud, but no enemy appeared, no trick was sprung. Only a mother's tears and a child's weak chewing filled the silence. The commander's chest felt lighter. though the weight of risk still pressed against him. He knew some of his men doubted him. He knew some whispered that mercy would bring disaster. But he also knew that leadership was not about easy choices. It was about hard ones, choices that defined what kind of men they would become. The child finished the bread slowly. Her small body leaned against her mother again, her breathing steadied, her eyes no longer empty. The mother held her close, rocking back and forth, her whispers now soft, like a lullaby. The soldiers watched, their hearts caught between relief and caution. The commander turned away for a moment, staring at the horizon. The ruins stretched far, endless reminders of what war had taken, and he thought of what mercy could build. He did not know if this act would bring peace or betrayal, but he knew it was the right choice, and sometimes the right choice was the only weapon left. The mother lifted her head once more, her voice breaking. "Thank you," she said in broken human tongue. The commander gave no answer, only a nod. The soldiers shifted, still uneasy, still alert. But in their eyes, something had changed. They had seen their commander choose mercy, and though fear remained, hope had entered with it. The ruined city was still dangerous, the war's shadow still heavy. But in that single act, a seed had been planted. The child lived, the mother wept, and humanity had shown its hand. The choice was made, and the galaxy would one day remember that moment, when humanity chose not with fear but with mercy. The bread was gone, the water flask nearly empty, but the child's eyes no longer looked hollow. Her lips, though cracked, curved into the smallest sign of life. The soldiers watched in silence, their weapons lowered but their tension sharp. The commander stood tall, his gaze steady, his heart still heavy with the weight of his decision. The alien mother cradled her daughter tightly. Her shoulders shook as quiet sobs escaped her. Tears cut paths down her dirt-stained face. Her voice, broken yet full of relief, whispered words that no human could understand. But even without knowing, the language, the meaning was clear. One soldier whispered, "Sir, we did it. She will live." Another muttered, "Or maybe we just signed our death." The clash of hope and fear still burned in the air. Yet no ambush came, no hidden enemy appeared. Only the soft sound of a mother's prayer filled the ruins. The commander's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the broken buildings. He knew too well the dangers of war. Traps had been laid before, and mercy had cost lives. But something in the scene before him felt different. It was raw. It was real. It was not a weapon. It was life, asking for life. The child leaned against her mother's chest. Her tiny hand rested weakly on the woman's arm. Her breathing steadied, though her body trembled with exhaustion. Her eyes closed slowly, not from weakness alone, but from peace. For the first time in days, she was safe, enough to sleep. The soldiers shifted uneasily, their armor clinking softly. Some looked away, unable to bear the sight. War had hardened them, carved away softness. But this moment brought back something they had buried, a reminder of what it meant to protect, not only fight. One soldier, younger than the rest, whispered, "Sir, she reminds me of my sister back home." Another grunted, "She reminds me of what we've lost." Their voices were low, but the commander heard every word. He knew mercy was not just for the child. It was for the soldiers too. It reminded them why they fought, why they endured. The alien mother slowly lifted her head. Her tear-stained face turned to the commander. She placed her hand over her heart and bowed. Her body trembled, but her gesture was strong. It was not surrender, it was gratitude. A bond made not of treaties or weapons, but of mercy. The commander did not bow back, but he gave a small nod. His soldiers saw it, and though none spoke, they felt the shift. This was not weakness. This was strength shown in a different way. The kind of strength that frightened empires more than weapons ever could. The child stirred in her mother's arms. Her small voice barely rose. A whisper, lost in the wind, but her eyes opened for a moment. She looked at the soldiers, not with fear, not with hate, but with quiet trust. The kind of trust only children could give, pure and unbroken. The soldiers froze at that gaze. It was not the gaze of an enemy. It was the gaze of a child who believed even for a second that humans could be kind. And in that instant, something unspoken passed through the group. They were not just soldiers of war, they were witnesses of hope. The commander spoke again, his voice steady. "This is mercy," he said quietly, more to himself than to his men. "It is not weakness. It is what separates us from them." His words carried weight. His men listened. Even the ruins seemed to hold still at his declaration. The mother pressed her forehead to the ground once more. Her hands shook as she whispered again and again, "Thank you. Thank you." Her voice was broken, but the gratitude in it was stronger than any shout. The sound lingered, weaving into the air, a song of survival born from mercy. The soldiers slowly relaxed, their grips on their weapons easing. For the first time in months they felt something other than rage, not joy, not victory, but a quiet sense of meaning. Their hearts, scarred by war, found a moment of peace, and though it was small, it was powerful. The commander turned, his eyes scanning the sky as the light faded. He knew the war was not over. He knew danger still stalked every shadow. But he also knew that in this one act, something greater had been set in motion. A seed planted that could grow beyond fire and ruin. The child slept in her mother's arms. Her chest rose and fell with steady breaths. The soldiers watched, silent, thoughtful, changed. And the commander whispered to himself, "Today humanity chose mercy." The ruins did not answer, the war did not end, but in that moment, in that act, the galaxy shifted, because mercy had been given where none was expected, because humanity had chosen not to destroy, but to protect, and one small life now carried the weight of that choice. The night settled over the ruined city. The child slept in her mother's arms, breathing steady. The soldiers kept their watch, eyes sharp, weapons ready, but hearts softer than before. The commander stood silent, his gaze lost in the darkness. He knew the act they had done today would not stay hidden. Mercy never stayed hidden. At first it was only whispers, a starving child fed by human hands, an enemy shown kindness instead of death. The story slipped through the ruins like smoke, carried by survivors who had seen it with their own eyes, carried by silence broken into words, and the ripple began. Other alien survivors heard of it. At first, they did not believe. Humans were known as fierce, dangerous, merciless in war, but hunger does not listen to fear. And so, step by step, more approached the human patrols, not soldiers, not fighters, but broken families, children, the old, the weak. They came with empty hands and hollow eyes, testing if the story was true. The soldiers were tense, their fingers near their weapons. Every approach could still be a trap. Every face could hide a blade. But again and again, they saw no soldiers, only survivors. And the commander remembered his own words. Mercy is what separates us. And he gave the order once more. Food was shared, water given, and life was passed from one hand to another. The ripple grew stronger. What began as a single act became a pattern. Other units heard of it. Other commanders debated it. Some called it weakness. Others called it the truest form of strength. Arguments sparked in tents and bunkers. But the truth was simple. Mercy was spreading. The alien survivors began to whisper among themselves. Humans were not like the empire they once feared. Humans fought hard, yes, humans killed when forced. But when victory was theirs, they did not crush, they did not starve. They gave, they chose compassion. It was a strange kind of power, one the galaxy had not seen before. Children were the first to believe, their eyes wide, their hands clutching scraps of food given by human soldiers. They no longer ran when they saw humans, they no longer hid in shadows. They began to smile, shy and weak, but real. And in their small voices the ripple grew louder. The soldiers themselves began to change. At first they were suspicious. every act of giving filled with doubt. But the more they fed, the more they saw. They saw children laugh again. They saw mothers weep. With relief, they saw lives spared not by bullets but by bread. And inside their hearts, something long buried began to return. Hope. One evening, around a small fire, a soldier whispered, "Maybe this is why we fought so hard." Another nodded, staring into the flames, not just to win but to show them who we are. The words spread among them. Their armor felt less heavy, their hearts less dark. They were no longer just destroyers, they were guardians. The ripple did not stop with survivors. It reached ears in distant camps. It reached eyes watching from hidden places. And it reached the enemy themselves. Alien soldiers who once believed humans were only monsters began to doubt. They saw the kindness shown to their own kind. They saw mercy given where vengeance was expected. And in their doubt, the war itself began to tremble. The commander knew the risk. He knew mercy could still be betrayed. He knew at any moment, trust could be shattered by a hidden blade. But he also knew that the ripple was stronger than fear. Each act of mercy added to a wave no army could stop. Because mercy did not weaken humanity, it defined it. The mother who first begged carried her child wherever she went. She spoke in her language to any who would listen. She told the story of the day humans chose life instead of death. Her voice spread across the ruins, her words carried across camps, and her daughter, once starving, became a symbol of survival. The ripple touched even the hardest hearts. A soldier who had lost his brother gave his last ration to an alien boy. Another who once swore never to forgive found himself smiling at a child's laughter. These were small acts, but together they built something greater than victory. They built the image of a people who fought not only with steel but with spirit. And so the ripple spread beyond the city, beyond the ruins, beyond the broken camps. It spread like fire in dry grass. It carried across the stars. Whispers became stories. Stories became belief, and belief became legacy. The commander looked at the sleeping child one last time. Her breath soft, her body safe, her future uncertain but alive. And he whispered to himself, "This is the ripple of mercy." The war was not over. The galaxy was still dark. But somewhere, within that darkness, a light was growing. A light carried not by weapons but by compassion. And it was strong enough to change everything. Years passed, and the war became memory. The ruins of the old city were rebuilt stone by stone. The smoke cleared, the fires died, but the scars never faded. Yet from those scars, a story lived on. A story of a mother's plea, a starving child, and a commander who chose mercy. The child grew no longer thin and weak. Her body grew strong, her steps firm, her eyes bright with life. She remembered hunger. She remembered fear, but above all she remembered kindness. Her first memory of hope was not from her own people. It was from the humans who had fed her when she was near death. She carried that memory like a flame that burned brighter. Each year, when others spoke of humans as monsters, she shook her head. When they warned of human cruelty, she told them another truth. That humans were dangerous, yes, but dangerous because they had the power to destroy, and chose not to. Her story spread wherever she went. In schools, children whispered about the humans who shared food instead of death. In markets, survivors repeated the tale of the commander who showed mercy. The story became more than memory. It became legend. And legends, once born, never die. The girl became a woman, and then a leader. Her voice carried weight, her eyes carried fire. When others pushed for revenge, she reminded them of mercy. When they planned for war, she spoke of peace. She did not beg for weakness. She demanded strength, but strength shaped by compassion, the same compassion that had once saved her life. On Earth, humanity also remembered. The soldiers who had stood in that ruined city told their children of the choice. Those children grew with the knowledge that mercy was not weakness. They grew knowing their parents had chosen life over hate. And in time, that story shaped humanity's face in the galaxy. The ripple had grown into a wave. It reached worlds far from the battlefield. It reached species who had never seen Earth, but knew of its people. Some feared them still. But fear was mixed with respect, because the humans were not only warriors, they were guardians. Guardians of hope in a galaxy that had long forgotten it. The woman, once the starving child, traveled to Earth many years later. She stood before human leaders, her voice strong, her hands steady, and she told her story again, how she had once been nothing but hunger and shadow, and how humanity had given her food instead of death. Her words filled the hall with silence. Her tears did not fall, for she spoke not with weakness but with pride. She ended with a single truth. Mercy is more dangerous than any weapon, she said, because weapons end lives but mercy changes them. The hall erupted in applause, not just for her but for the memory of that single act that had lived through time. The commander was long gone by then, his name remembered only in books and whispers, but his choice lived on in her. Every time she spoke, every time she led, his decision echoed. His legacy was not carved in stone, but in the heart of the child he saved, and across the galaxy, his choice shaped new paths. Worlds once divided by fear found bridges in mercy. Enemies once sworn to destroy found reason to speak. It was not perfect. Peace never was. But mercy gave them a chance, and sometimes a chance was enough. The woman often looked to the stars at night. She remembered the cold street, the sound of her mother's voice, the faces of the soldiers. She remembered the moment bread touched her lips and life returned, and she whispered into the night, "I carry your mercy still." The stars did not answer, but she knew the galaxy had already heard, and so the legacy remained. A single choice in a ruined city had outlived war. A starving child had grown into a voice for peace, and humanity had shown that its greatest weapon was not fire, not steel, not fury, but the power to give life when it could have taken it. In the end, the galaxy remembered not the battles, not the flames, not the ruins. It remembered the plea of a mother, the hunger of a child, and the hand that chose to feed. It remembered that in the darkest hour, humanity chose mercy, and that mercy, stronger than any blade, became their true legacy.